When discussing the issue of marriage, the issue of government is bound to come up sooner or later. Your marriage won't be official until you've received a marriage license from the courthouse, right? Regardless of whatever religious ceremony you might have undertaken. But why is it that the state is so interested in regulating marriage? And are its intentions as noble as we've been told? Stay tuned to find out. It should go without saying that when considered simply as a practice rather than a formal institution, marriage can and does exist, whether or not it is recognized by government. In fact, while scientists disagree about specific matters related to historical human mating patterns, there is widespread consensus that the history of the human species is characterized by monogamous relationships between men and women, even in societies where polygamous relationships were socially acceptable. As anthropologists Ryan Schatt and Karen Kramer write in their paper, Are We Monogamous? A review of the evolution of pair bonding in humans and its contemporary variation cross-culturally, biological indicators suggest a mating system where both sexes form a long-term pair bond with a single partner. And while polygyny was likely present in the human past as it is across contemporary human societies, the weight of evidence seems to support social monogamy. This does not preclude males and females from taking multiple partners through serial monogamy, or by occasionally engaging in uncommitted sexual relationships. However, while extra-pair paternity varies across socially monogamous animals, human rates of non-paternity are comparatively low. In other words, even though it's unquestionably true that people do not always stay faithful to their spouses, monogamous relationships between men and women who raise their children together always seem to emerge as the norm in human societies, even if there is no social stigma against other arrangements. Regarding the latter, biologist and evolutionary psychologist David Barash notes that such societies that condone polygamous relationships turn out to be only preferentially so, and that men and women tend to take only one partner, in stark contrast to the behavior of primates and other mammals. This is not surprising considering what we've covered in the previous two videos of this series. Men and women each have unique capabilities that, when exercised in a monogamous relationship, create the best situation for procreating children and helping them to thrive in a cruel world. But beyond the pragmatic concerns of child rearing, the study of biology shows that as men and women engage in sexual intercourse, they actually develop an intangible bond to one another that is reflective of the marriage relationship. Often referred to as pair bonding, the Medical Institute for Sexual Health summarizes it thus: our behavior actually changes our brain. The connections between neurons that are stimulated by our actions increase with more use and decrease with less use. When a couple engages in sexual behavior, neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, vasopressin, and dopamine stimulate formulation of synaptic connections in the brain, associating the pleasure of sex with the partners involved, encouraging them to bond and to have more sex together, leading to the beginning of a family unit. I go to great lengths to point this out because many people will try and claim that marriage is a relatively recent phenomenon and not something that exists in nature. It may be true that the term marriage was not always used, and various religious and cultural practices related to marriage have changed over time. But the family, a man, a woman, and their children, has always been a natural institution arranged for mutual benefit. If anyone tries to argue otherwise, it will become apparent very quickly that they have an agenda that requires undermining the family. And that brings us to the question of the state. What interest does the state have in the issue of marriage? Well, in order for the state to exist, its citizens must believe that there exists some societal good that can only come from the state. Think about it. No one wants to pay taxes solely for the sake of paying taxes. Those that support the government's forced expropriation of their wealth only support it inasmuch as they believe that this is the only way to ensure that they receive police protection, health care, or whatever other service it is believed that only the state can provide. However, in a society with strong families, there is less need for government. If responsible husbands are working to provide for their families, their wives won't need welfare handouts. If responsible mothers are tending to their homes and caring for their children, government-run schools and daycare centers become irrelevant. Due to the strong correlation between crime and fatherlessness, communities with more intact families are likely to suffer less crime and therefore require less police protection. But by extension, if fathers are fulfilling their responsibility of protecting their wives and children, this lessens the requirement for government protection services even further. Intact families with a mother and father are associated with greater health, and thus cut back on the need for healthcare services. The list could go on, but the bottom line is, the more people depend on their families, the less likely they'll be to believe that they need government at all. However, this doesn't sit too well with those that sit in the seat of government. No matter how much altruists try and shove their message of selflessness down our throats, the fundamental reality is that individuals act in their own self-interest, and this will never change. However, the difference between citizens and government is that unlike its citizens, the government has the perceived legitimacy to use force to obtain its ends. Maybe it happens slowly, maybe it happens quickly, but the end result of this reality is that the leaders of government will always use their authority to further their own interests, expropriating greater and greater amounts of wealth from their citizens and expanding the scope of their authority into more and more aspects of human life. There is no such thing as a small government. A small government will always grow larger over time. But as you might imagine, the family is a hindrance to the state's efforts to grow its power. If more intact families with married mothers and fathers means less reliance on government, then the state will necessarily have to prevent the formation of families if it wants to grow its power. To do this, it will have to abolish the natural incentives that lead people into marriage in the first place. But if the state takes swift and sudden action to do this, the people are likely to fight back. A cunning government will therefore break down the family slowly and in several deliberate steps. Step 1. Create a formal government marriage license. Initially, this is sold to the public as being for their own good. It's not a government effort to control marriage, it's just the government formally recognizing your family as a unit, so that it can better serve your interests as a family. In reality, this simply allows the government to keep tabs on whether or not its efforts to destroy the family are working, in that it can keep track of marriage rates and divorce rates. Step 2. Institute policies designed to preserve marriage and protect the family. Again, on the surface, this will appear to be government efforts to acknowledge that marriage and family is better for everyone. The initial policies might even work towards that end, in that tax incentives and other legislation might actually encourage more people to get married and have children. However, the insidious nature of what's going on is that over time, people will start to believe that it is the responsibility of the state to create and sustain families, not something that happens naturally for mutual benefit of all parties. As a result, both pro-traditional family and anti-traditional family individuals will seek to give the state more authority with regards to marriage. Just think about the debate over same-sex marriage. Step 3. Manufacture a crisis that turns the parties of marriage against one another, painting one subset of people as helpless victims whose only salvation is found in the state. This is the same strategy Karl Marx used with his class theory of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. But in the case of the family, the obvious parties to use are men and women. Hence, feminism, which is really just a gynocentric form of Marxism, is the engine through which the state begins the main phase of its attack on marriage. Women are told that the natural role of a wife was manufactured by men in order to oppress them, and that only by acting like men will they ever achieve equality. Naturally, since society now believes that the idea of marriage is a state creation to be defined and enforced by government, this means more government policies for protecting women from their abusive oppressors. One by one, more and more policies get codified into law that paint men as abusive oppressors and women as helpless victims that must be rescued through increased government intervention. Businesses are encouraged to hire more women or face lawsuits for not being diverse enough. No-fault divorce laws are put into place that allow women to divorce their husbands for any reason and be rewarded with cash and full custody of children for doing so. Law enforcement adopts policies designed to assume male guilt with regards to crimes against women, regardless of evidence, and counseling programs are structured to teach men that they are responsible for all problems that women experience. Women soon find out that they'll be rewarded with cash and a medal for heroism if they leave their husbands, and that they can either succeed in the workplace or depend on government handouts for sustenance. Men, on the other hand, discover that marriage now comes with a huge personal risk. The mere accusation of abuse from their wives without any evidence could be enough to put them behind bars, or at least ruin their prospects for a successful career. Meanwhile, children perhaps take the hardest hit. Without both parents in the home, they are far more likely to suffer developmental problems, but this is no concern of the state. With fathers out of the home and mothers working, children get into government-run schools faster, making them more susceptible to state indoctrination. With all the incentives that once existed to marry and have a family gone, is it any surprise that fewer and fewer people get married and that society becomes increasingly dependent on a large, powerful government? The final step will be for the state to formally put an end to the family altogether, every function it once fulfilled having become a direct function of the government. In fact, this last phase is instrumental in the government takeover of every other aspect of human life that it seeks to control. In his essay, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, Friedrich Engels, the noted partner of Karl Marx, wrote, "What we can now conjecture about the way in which sexual relations will be ordered after the impending overthrow of capitalist production is mainly of a negative character, limited for the most part to what will disappear. But what will there be new? That will be answered when a new generation has grown up, a generation of men who never in their lives have known what it is to buy a woman's surrender with money or any other social instrument of power. A generation of women who have never known what it is to give themselves to a man for any other considerations than real love, or to refuse to give themselves to their lover from fear of the economic consequences. When these people are in the world, they will care precious little what anybody today thinks they ought to do. They will make their own practice and their corresponding public opinion about the practice of each individual, and that will be the end of it." This is a chilling statement in light of the current state of marriage and the family. It's no coincidence that efforts to undermine the family are occurring at a time that socialism is becoming increasingly popular, and that figures on the left and the right are increasingly calling for more government intervention to fix society's ills. In summary, marriage is not a creation of the government. Rather, it is the natural state of affairs prior to the government. No matter what politicians may say on the surface, the state will always have a direct incentive to destroy marriage, and thus no government policy can be depended on to preserve the institution. If marriage is to become what it is meant to be again, this can only be through the total privatization of marriage, which I will discuss in a follow-on video. But what do you guys think? Does the state have a vested interest in destroying marriage? And how do you think government policy affects whether or not men and women get married and start families? Be sure to leave a comment below, and that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.